Today, I'm traveling to a place where time seems to move differently, Mackinac Island, Michigan. An island surrounded by the Great Lakes, where horses still rule the streets, bicycles replace cars, and one unusual decision has shaped life here for more than a century.
When I reached at the place, the first thing I noticed wasn't what I saw, it was what I didn't hear. No engines. No horns. No traffic. On this island, thousands of people arrive every day.
Yet private cars have been banned for more than 125 years. Why would an entire community choose to stop time like this? Be there in the video and explore the entire journey here. I arrived on Mackinac Island the same way nearly every visitor does, by ferry. As the mainland slowly disappeared behind me, I expected to see the usual signs of a busy tourist destination.
Instead, I was greeted by horse-drawn carriages, rows of bicycles, and streets completely free of cars.
It felt less like stepping onto an island, and more like stepping into another century.
As I walked through the harbor, I noticed something unusual. People weren't rushing. Hotel staff delivered luggage in horse wagons, children rode bicycles without worrying about traffic, and the only sounds were waves, birds, and the steady rhythm of horses' hooves against the pavement. The silence was almost unsettling. At first, I assumed this was simply a tradition preserved for tourists. But the more I explored, the more I realized this wasn't a performance. Nearly 500 people actually live here year-round, and this is how they travel every single day.
Why would an American island refuse the invention that transformed the entire country? The answer, I discovered, began more than a century ago. My first clue came from an event that sounds almost unbelievable today. In 1898, one of the earliest gasoline-powered automobile arrived on Mackinac Island.
Across America, cars were being celebrated as the future of transportation, but here, the reaction was completely different. Historical records describe how the noisy machine frightened the island's horses. Some became startled and difficult to control, creating dangerous situations on the narrow streets. At the time, horses weren't just a way to get around, they carried people, delivered supplies, and kept the island functioning. A single automobile suddenly threatened that entire system. Rather than adapting to the new invention, local leaders made a decision that seemed temporary. They banned motor vehicles from the island to protect public safety. Most people probably assumed the rule would disappear once automobiles became common. It never did.
As the rest of the United States widened roads, built highways, and embraced car culture, Mackinac Island quietly chose a different path.
The ban remained in place, decade after decade, until it became more than just a local law. It became part of the island's identity.
Standing on those quiet streets, I realized this wasn't simply a place without cars. It was a place that had preserved an entirely different way of life. But one question still remained. Why was this small island so important that preserving it became worth protecting for generations?
To understand why Mackinac Island refused to change, I had to look far beyond the automobile. Long before tourists arrived with cameras and bicycles, this small island held enormous importance. Sitting between Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, it controlled one of the most valuable waterways in North America. For centuries, Native American tribes, especially the Anishinaabe people, considered this island a sacred place filled with stories, traditions, and spiritual meaning. In the 1600s, French explorers and fur traders recognized its strategic location and established trading posts nearby. Later, the British built Fort Mackinac to defend the region, and during the War of 1812, control of the island shifted through fierce battles between British and American forces. The quiet streets I was walking had once witnessed military conflict and political rivalry. By the late 19th century, the island's purpose changed once again. Instead of soldiers, wealthy families from cities like Chicago and Detroit arrived each summer seeking fresh air and peaceful surroundings. Grand hotels, elegant Victorian cottages, and scenic walking paths transformed Mackinac into one of America's earliest vacation destinations. When automobiles began appearing across the country, many communities demolished historic neighborhoods to make room for wider roads and modern development. Mackinac Island never had to make that choice. The ban on cars unintentionally protected its historic streets, preserved its Victorian architecture, and maintained the peaceful atmosphere visitors had fallen in love with. Until this point, I believe the island's greatest mystery was how it had managed to keep cars away for more than a century. But as I spent more time here, I realized I had been asking the wrong question. The real mystery wasn't how the ban survived, it was how an entire community continued to function without the machines most of us depend on every day. Every morning, ferries bring in food, building materials, hotel supplies, and thousands of visitors. Without delivery trucks, everything must be unloaded by hand and transported across the island using horse-drawn freight wagons, bicycles, or a small number of specially permitted utility vehicles reserved for essential services. Every delivery requires planning, coordination, and far more effort than it would on the mainland. Then I noticed something even more surprising. Without the constant sound of engines, the island felt completely different. I could hear birds singing above the trees, waves gently reaching the shoreline, and the rhythmic echo of horses' hooves along the streets. People weren't staring at traffic or rushing to the next destination. They were actually looking around, talking to one another, and taking their time. At that moment, I understood that Mackinac Island hadn't simply given up cars. In exchange, it had gained something that many modern cities had quietly lost: silence, patience, and a slower rhythm of life. And perhaps that was the island's greatest secret. Removing cars hadn't just changed transportation. It had changed the way people experienced time itself. At first, it seemed like Mackinac Island was simply preserving an old tradition. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized its story feels surprisingly relevant today. Around the world, cities are becoming louder, busier, and more crowded. Traffic congestion, air pollution, and constant noise have become part of everyday life. Yet this small island offers a glimpse of what life can feel like when those pressures are removed. Today, tourism is the island's lifeblood, welcoming hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. People don't travel here because it has towering skyscrapers or thrilling attractions. They come to experience something that has become increasingly rare: a place where walking, cycling, and horse-drawn carriages still shape daily life. Even the famous 8-mile road that circles the island remains open to bicycles and horse-drawn carriages instead of private automobiles, encouraging visitors to slow down and experience the landscape rather than race through it. The island also reminds us that progress doesn't always mean replacing the old with the new. Modern technology still exists here. Businesses use the internet, hotels offer modern comforts, and residents stay connected to the outside world. But they have learned to combine today's conveniences with traditions that protect the island's unique character. As I watched another carriage quietly pass by, I couldn't help wondering if Mackinac Island had discovered something many places had forgotten. Maybe the fastest way isn't always the best way. As my investigation came to an end, I realized Mackinac Island wasn't really a story about cars. It was a story about choices. More than a century ago, a small community made a practical decision to solve an immediate problem, and no one could have imagined that the same decision would one day make this island one of the most unique places in America. Today, cities across the world are searching for ways to reduce traffic, improve air quality, and create streets that are safer for people instead of vehicles. Some have introduced pedestrian-only districts, expanded cycling networks, and limited cars in historic centers, yet Mackinac Island quietly achieved something similar long before these ideas became global conversations. Not because it was trying to become an environmental model, but because history simply took it in a different direction. Of course, its solution cannot be copied everywhere. An island with a small population is very different from a crowded modern city. But that isn't what makes Mackinac Island important. Its real lesson is that communities are shaped by the decisions they choose to protect. While most places continuously replace the old with the new, this island found value in preserving what already worked. Standing on the shoreline, watching another ferry arrive, I realized every passenger was about to experience something that had almost disappeared from modern life. A place where the journey wasn't measured by speed, but by the moments between destinations. Perhaps the greatest mystery was never why Mackinac Island banned cars. Perhaps it was why so many of us now find the idea of living without them almost impossible to imagine. As the ferry carried me away from Mackinac Island, the silence slowly faded, replaced once again by the familiar sound of traffic. Only then did I realize how quickly I had adapted to a world without cars. When I first arrived, I thought I was investigating an unusual transportation rule. Instead, I discovered a community that had protected something far more valuable, a different way of experiencing everyday life. For more than 125 years, Mackinac Island has quietly proven that progress isn't always about moving faster. Sometimes it's about knowing what is worth preserving. As the island disappeared into the distance, one final thought stayed with me. In a world where almost every place is trying to keep up with the future, Perhaps the most extraordinary destination is the one that had the courage to slow down and never look back.